Welcome to Heaven's Edge. Platform and nutrient exchange is appropriate for your life form.
An ale, I guess?
Sympathizing ale?
Alright, thanks. Let's try it. It's actually pretty good.
Attention Spacers, welcome back to another thrilling episode of Adventures in the Void. We are a sci-fi tabletop role-playing game discussion transmission. I am Jake.
And I'm Ross.
Join us as we trade tales and celebrate the beauty and wonder of the cosmos.
Welcome to the Adventures in the Void Spacecast. My name is Ross McClure, and here we talk about independent science fiction tabletop role-playing games. I'm joined with my friend Father Chris.
Good evening. Nice to be here.
Yeah. So, Father Chris, this game we're playing.
Yes. It's a ride.
Yeah.
It's called Traveler.
It is. What is Traveler?
Traveler is a science fiction role-playing game created in 1977 by Mark Miller, and it is the example of science fiction role-playing that has a parallel life to D&D that is both fascinating and maddening to observe.
How is it fascinating? Well, actually, let me back up. So, you said it has a parallel life to D&D, and by that, I assume you mean like when someone thinks of a fantasy role-playing game, they're going to think of Dungeons and Dragons. To the point that Dungeons and Dragons is almost like I can't think of the word, but like you might say, give me a Kleenex or give me a Coke. Dungeons and Dragons is often used in that way to mean just fantasy role-playing games. So would you say that Traveler could be that? Maybe not in the popular conscience, like if someone says science fiction role-playing game, but like as that example and basis that has been parallel to fantasy role-playing games, Traveler has been that to science fiction. Is that what you mean?
I wish that was true. But it's not. I mean, if it was true, then there would have been no need for a Firefly tabletop role-playing game, but that game exists.
Yeah, that is true.
As does, a game for every other sort of, ragtag crew. There's probably a Cowboy Bebop.
There is a Cowboy Bebop RPG. There's an The Expanse RPG.
Right.
And there's a there are.
If Traveler was truly comparable, and this is the maddening part for me, is that Traveler deserves to be up there with D&D, and its dice system is way easier to use than any of the things that we've talked about, including D&D.
Yeah.
So it's kind of fascinating to me that it doesn't have the wider appeal and reputation.
Okay, so
who am I, by the way? Does anybody care? Why are you calling me? I know it doesn't matter.
I thought you would do that. I thought you would do that.
We started off. We started off. Well, I didn't want to, but yeah, he calls me Father Chris because I happen to be an Orthodox priest, but we also are friends through the shared interest of tabletop role-playing games, and we've had many an interesting conversation about all these topics. And so I'm very happy to discuss Traveller because you might call it like my baby in a way.
Yeah.
It's a game that I always champion. I'm always happy to talk about its virtues, and so I was invited on to do just that. So here I am. But back to the to the other question.
So it wouldn't be, however, too far of a stretch to. I think I've said something like this. Like maybe this is a little bit of a stretch, but not too far of a stretch to say Dungeons and Dragons is to fantasy as Traveller is to science fiction, or at least it could be. Like it could fulfill that role, even if it doesn't dominate the brand conscience in the way that Dungeons and Dragons does. Yeah. But if you're thinking science fiction, we had another episode that was like, how do you play D&D in space? And the first thing I start out with is don't play D&D in space. Play space. Play science fiction in space. And the place I would point people to go is Traveller, which is like the grandfather of epic science fiction role-playing. And so you said it was one of the reasons for that is it was made in 1977. So we're talking 3 years after the initial publication of Dungeons and Dragons Traveller comes out. And that's one of the reasons it's the kind of grandfather of science fiction role-playing. But what are the other reasons? Like why Traveller?
I mean, the other reasons that it's the grandfather of science fiction, I don't know if anyone else did it first. But a lot of the decisions that Mark Miller made were done with the consciousness of D&D existing. And he and the guys in his office loving D&D, and at the same time trying to carve out their own space in an era when the two I think I haven't done the research into how popular they were as compared to each other when they were first coming up, but Traveller filled a niche that D&D did not, and that dice system that Mark Miller specifically talks about, he deliberately chose D6 because it was dice that anybody might have in their home.
Yeah, that's cool.
They didn't have to. They didn't, and so it actually, of course, reduces significantly the production cost for Mark Miller and his company to sell these things, and anybody could just get their Yahtzee game and be able to start playing Traveller.
Yeah. So I mean, you're mentioning the dice system. So Dungeons and Dragons. By the way, our audience for this podcast. Some people have never played a role-playing game before. So this is a place, this can be a starting point. This can be a place to learn and come in and open the door for people. For other people, a lot of times what we do is this is a place where people have played what we call the brand game, the big ampersand game by that one company.
Right.
They've played that game, and now they are asking questions like, how do you play D&D in space? What games are there out there? Lots of people are asking that question right now, and that's who we're kind of inviting here to the Spacecast to listen in. So
right.
So they're familiar. Some people are familiar with Dungeons and Dragons. You roll a 20-sided die to meet a target number. You've got 6 stats and hit points in an armor class, right? And it's because it's a war game. It's built on a war game, and you have things like a sword or a bow to attack an armor class with that D20 to chip away at hit points at monsters. That's the character-facing aspect of it with dice. What is Traveller as a game? Like, how's it different from Dungeons and Dragons?
Well, the dice difference might be a metaphor for all the rest of the differences. I guess the answer might be it's different in almost every way.
Huh.
It's as I sit here thinking about it. I mean, there are obvious some similarities. You're playing a single character, who has a set of 6 stats that have numerical values that are seemingly roughly comparable. but it's what happens when you roll the dice in Traveler, and what can happen are worlds away, literally, from what can happen in D&D. And it's not a qualitative difference, it's literally a quantitative one, but the quantity makes the quality in Traveler in some ways.
Okay, so
I'm speaking in riddles here. So the thing about Traveler is you can generate a whole universe with your 2 6-sided dice, and that's the thing that hooks me in the heart, and keeps me, championing Traveler. Is for recreation, I can sit and create Traveler characters in any edition of Traveler. And as the characters are being generated with the dice, whole stories are just popping into my mind of, all these people that I'm making. And then I can take the same 2 dice and do the same thing with planets. And then do the same thing with subsectors that are multiple light years across. And
So on one level, you're saying that one difference is that Dungeons & Dragons, 20-sided die. Some people might argue that there are other versions that don't use a 20-sided die, but, come on. I know that your Gygax started with chits in a bag because he didn't like the 2d6, because a lot of war games, I guess, they used it, and then they didn't have all those polyhedrals, so he would have a bag of, tokens or chits, and he would just pull a random number that was a linear chance, right? So you have this linear chance between 1 and 20, all 5% equal chances. And in this game, you've got 2d6 most of the time, right? So it establishes a bell curve. And you're saying that's one basic difference is that d20 versus 2d6s. And when we say d something, what we mean is it's a die with a certain number of faces. So a d6 is a cube, and a d20, I don't even know what that's called, but it's it's got 20 faces. It's almost like a circle, almost, with so many faces.
Yes.
So, and then what's really amazing is, in Dungeons & Dragons, it's very character focused, and regardless of the edition, you really go up from the character up. Because if you're talking about a wilderness or you're talking about a dungeon, particularly a wilderness, in the original game they used a separate game for that, an entirely separate game for that. And then, but the thinking on things still stayed in that kind of plane of, the war games and all this kind of stuff that all that took place in. But you're saying in Traveler, you can make a character with 2d6. You can make a planet with a 2d6, or an entire galaxy with a 2d6.
Exactly that. And then so you can make anything you want. If you're talking about T5, you can make weapons with the same method. You can make new kinds of animals, beasts for your characters to encounter.
Animals,
all of these things linked into the, or suggested, the final form of these things would be suggested by the type of planet that you're creating the animal for. But the fact that the whole system essentially encapsulates a universe generator that is powered by, not to sound too corny about it, but nothing but 2 6-sided dice and your imagination. But the 2 6-sided dice and the way that the system is constructed provide just enough information to hook into your imagination, and which will automatically start filling in the blanks, even with sometimes nonsensical results. And not everybody engages in the universe creation side of it, but I guess. Sorry, go ahead, Ross. Yeah, you were about to hop in with another thing. I was about to talk about... Anyway, go ahead.
Jake and I, back when we were in the tavern, wild story, I'll tell you about that some other time, but back when this was a tavern, we had a conversation about this, where we determined, from my point of view at least, and I think Jake shares this point of view. Jake is usually my other co-host for this Spacecast. that there's this idea of apophenia. There's this power of the mind, and that one thing is actually one of the it might be the most important thing. That it's not that you're working from nothing, but that you have a little bit, enough, and your brain will automatically fill in the details. And if you can follow the trail of your brain and the way it will fill something in, it will tell you everything you need to know. And it'll be a realistic and believable world that you can interact with. Now, in Dungeons and Dragons, and particularly in old school Dungeons and Dragons, which leans very heavily on that, you will have a rumor table. And I later saw the rumor table presented in other forms, like the 10 secrets about the world. Well, it's just a rumor table, actually. It's like, here are some hints of what's going on out in the wild places. If you encounter something, you roll on a table and then determine how far away it is and what its attitude is and how many there are. And from those context clues, it should be able to tell you if they're at war with another faction, if it's on a nearby hill, if it is locked behind a door, and if it is, why it would be in there. And although that maybe sounds intimidating to someone who's new, a new referee, the truth is that our minds are actually very good at this. And it's a primal ability. This is something anyone could really do. If you just are presented a situation, you say, well, 6 goblins are behind that locked door. And then you, the referee, know that behind that locked door is a pit. And 75% of the room consists of a pit. Maybe the first thing that just came to my mind is, did they fall in the pit? Oh, maybe they did. There you go. 6 goblins fell in a pit. That's dynamic. Now something is happening. So when they go in the room, and instead of just like 6 goblins there to kill, all of a sudden the goblins are like needing help and they're in a pit. That's an interesting, responsive, and flexible situation you can interact with. So, okay, Dungeons and Dragons uses this apophenia. You're saying that you can generate an entire galaxy with that. Give me an example. Like, if you were to roll 2d6 right now, how do you get a planet out of it?
You would roll a planet the same way you'd roll a character. And for those who've played Dungeons and Dragons, it happens in much the same sequence. Every character in Traveler and every planet in Traveler each have 6 core statistics. If you're talking about people, the code is known as the UPP, or Universal Personality Profile. Another charming thing about Traveler, as a sidebar, is that in most of the editions, everything that's expressed in a sort of coded method within the mechanics of the game, such as the 6 stats for a person or the 6 stats for a planet, also exists diegetically in the world, in the universe. In other words, the codes that you generate, the numerical codes that express a person's stats or a planet's stats, in universe they represent the Imperium's standardized coding system for keeping track of people, and for quickly identifying what you might expect to find if encountering that person or that planet.
I feel like that's pretty profound. So let me attempt to restate that, because you said that well. Let me say that clumsily, but like not as intelligently.
Highfalutin.
Yeah,
Highfalutin.
It was great. Like especially diegesis, which is another thing Jake and I talked about. But what I'm hearing you say is that so I have it up here, and you roll. It looks like you roll 2d6, and it determines if there's a starport floating above the planet. Like, that's just one thing I got here. I've got starport, naval base, scout base, gas giant, the size, the atmosphere, the hydrographics.
Oh, well, those are all the things for the entire parsec.
Oh,
yes,
my bad.
for the whole world. Yeah. Well, no, you're not wrong, because in Traveler parlance, the term world encompasses all of the things
within
of civilization within a parsec. Yes.
Good point. Well, and we'll circle back to that, because There's obviously a lot to crack apart here, but let's say the world, right? And I have up here the atmosphere, and it has digits. It represents 0 through C, but that's 1 through 12, and you roll 2d6. And I'm going to literally do that right now. I'm going to do it literally right now.
Why not start with size? Make a whole planet right now.
Yeah, no, I'm going to do it. You can hear the.
I think the first physical stat for a planet is the size.
All right, I got a planet that is 6,000 miles across.
Okay, and by way of comparison, the Earth is about 16,000 miles across?
Yeah, and that is listed in the rules, by the way, for people listening, is Terra, or Earth. According to this, it's a medium-sized planet, which is 6,000 miles across. Okay, so Earth, and then I rolled an Earth-sized planet. Okay, so that means one of the things that the rules say is that because it has a radius akin to Earth size, that the gravity is the same. But we'll get back there. But here my brain is already doing stuff.
Yeah.
That's the point. Is right now my brain, and that's what I want to capture, is what happens in your brain at that moment. You just roll a planetoid or a planet or something that's half the size of Earth. Then you say, all right, what does that mean? And like, what happens in your brain? You just rolled a 2.
Right. Well, stat number 2 is atmosphere.
Okay, I'll roll that. So I got an Earth-sized planet, and then I got that its atmosphere is dense and tainted.
Right. Which, if it's Earth-sized, could quite likely mean that it's heavy pollution. But perhaps we'll find that out as we discover what the tech level of this thing is. And I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but much like a person, and this expresses a philosophy of life, really. Mark Miller is, in all versions of Traveler, I believe, he's trying to sort of crack the code of numerically expressing just the way the universe works. But in any case, for either a person or a planet, your first 3 stats are your physical stats, and your next 3 stats are your ineffable qualities,
wow.
your social stats, or your intelligence, etc.
So he built the way of building planets the same as building a D&D character, and he built the same way building a solar system or a parsec or whatever, and he built the way of building an entire sector like building a character, and he built an entire way of generating the same mental processes by which someone would roll up a cleric, and they would say, my cleric's intelligence is 5, so maybe he's like this, and his strength is 12, so maybe he's this big dumb zealot, and you play off that. And now all of a sudden you're able to do that for an entire galaxy. And
I'll stress this, probably I've stressed it in the game we play together, but also, I think it's so important. It's one of those things that hides, and not everybody cares or gets into it, but these six numeral hexadecimal codes, which is all they are also used in the universe by the Scout Service, and by experienced space pilots everywhere, so that the player can begin to think in terms of the world that his character is playing in, and it draws you in. The more you get into Traveler, the more you can effectively play a Traveler character in the world without. Which I guess is true of a lot of systems.
No, it's not.
But,
no, you're right. This is miraculous in my opinion. Old school D&D sort of did this, right? Like you would talk about... no, actually it didn't do this. You would describe characters in Dungeons & Dragons in scientific terms like dexterity and things like that, and it's not the same language or thought wave that would happen for characters who are medieval fantasy characters. But you're saying that when you make a planet as a person, a hobbyist that's like rolling up a planet, everything from this book that you create is the same thing that the way a character in that world would think of a planet.
Well, and what's interesting, yeah, exactly, because like, so let's say I'm the referee and I create this planet. I know exactly what's on it.
Yeah.
But an experienced traveler player could hear the planet code and begin to think about what might be on it without having to actually interact directly, and ask a lot of filter questions where you're like, okay, make this make sense to me. And it's something that you've brought up before, Ross, and this may be true, is certainly true of a lot of different games, but the more you know about the kind of sci-fi tropes that Traveler operates on, the more successful you will be as a Traveler player. I think that's probably undeniable, and it might present a barrier to entry for some people if they're not natively interested in that kind of thing.
Right.
But I can say I got interested in that kind of fiction because of Traveler, because I was so enchanted by the way the system worked and the technology that it was sort of simulating or representing.
I want to speak to that, and then I'm going to return to this idea of apophenia, because I think this is the key, it seems to me, and even more so in Traveler. I think it's really magical. But the barriers to entry that you're talking about. So I'm a pretty new Traveler referee, and I'm engaging with that challenge, and I will admit it is a challenge. And I heard recently, but I was right off the bat, I'll tell you, for me, it's a worthwhile challenge. It's a challenge I'm enjoying, like I want to do. But I was listening to someone talk recently, and it was a bit of a complaint essay about a video essay about, is there really science fiction anymore? And what he proposed is that much of what we call science fiction is actually speculative fiction. And then science fiction it requires an interest in actual science, like an interest in the physical world and the properties of the world. And that's not necessarily the same as, say, space fantasy or something that simply wouldn't require that. Like, you wouldn't need to know these things in Star Wars. But, like, there's this page right here, and to me, this page sums up Traveler. Because I used to think in terms of characters, that Traveler had 6 stats. You rolled a 2d6, and you had a list of skills, and that was Traveler. Like, I thought that was Traveler. But I've seen...
And by way of reference, he's just held up for my viewing pleasure several equations that describe...
You don't need to know the equations, to be clear, right off the bat. You don't need to know the equations.
Yeah.
But
Mark Miller wants you to know that they're real.
Yeah, but what these equations are, if anybody's watched The Expanse, this is the equation for a turn and burn. A consistent acceleration to a midpoint, and then a turnaround with a consistent deceleration to an end point. But anyways, what I'm saying is, something that makes Traveler unique is it is science fiction. I think that's something incredibly unique about Traveler. You're not going to get that in Star Frontiers. You're not going to get that in West End Games D6. You're not going to get that in White Star, and I love all those games, and we're going to talk about all of them. But Traveler is science fiction and requires, I think, a curiosity and a familiarity with it. And the reason I say that is I used to say that it's about these characters, and so you got roll a 2d6 to get an 8. That's Traveler, usually, and you've got 6 stats: strength and endurance and dexterity and whatever, and then you got a list of skills like admin 2, and they go up to 5 or whatever, and I would say that's the case, and I would say it's more than that. To me, the key is Traveler is built on physical realities, and you can't say that about all RPGs. You could say that about old school D&D or original D&D, because you would say a monster will appear something like 2d6 yards away, in the wilderness, or maybe, 4d6 yards away in BX, and 2d6 feet away in a dungeon. And it will, so you've got feet in yards, right? And so you have these physical rules to the world in Dungeons and Dragons, but they're about traversing a wilderness and delving into a dungeon. But here, the physical rules of the world state that travel of ships is measured by 1 g. Well, what is a g? I know a g is 9.82 meters per second squared, right? Mark Miller disagrees with me. He says it's 10 meters per second squared. But anyways, I'm pretty sure it's 9.82 meters per second squared. And how fast can, like how fast, what is a light year versus a parsec? And if you don't know any of these things, it will be hard to convey a science fiction universe without knowing the physical laws of the universe. And there are all these restraints that are extremely important, like that a ship can only travel a parsec per to the extent that it has there's this technology called the jump drive. A jump drive, if it has a rating of 1, can travel 1 parsec, right?
Right. And let's maybe spend a second talking about every good sci-fi setting has at least 1 or 2
unobtainiums.
MacGuffin technologies. Yeah. And
this one's got at least 2 I can think of. But
this one has the jump drive and gravity manipulation.
Yeah.
Those are the 2 big ones. And they're somehow tied together lore-wise. I can't remember what the exact connection is, but the overall rule of thumb is that if a world is tech level 9 or higher, it can make its own starships. Meaning that tech level 9 is somehow associated with being able to make a jump 1 engine. And as you were just saying, jump 1 simply means you can jump 1 parsec before expending all of your fuel, and in approximately the space of a week. And
right.
The jump engines go from 1 to 6 with a numerical equivalent, jump drive rating equals number of parsecs you can move in about a week.
So all this spacey stuff, to get into science fiction role-playing, I think a person would have to have a curiosity about. Now, I
think so too. It's not primarily a narrative-driven thing.
Yeah. Now, I will say you can also, you can enjoy a narrative. I certainly do. I mean, certainly, by all means, you can do both. You can also, I also am going to speak with Omar Golan, who is the creator of Cepheus Quantum, Cepheus Deluxe, Barbaric. And his game is really good at, it doesn't have necessarily all of this spelled out, this kind of background physics of the universe. Cepheus Quantum in particular, it gives you a system to roll 2d6 with some stats and some simple skills. And you can hop into a science fiction universe, to me, that could be a space fantasy universe. But to me, what distinguishes Traveler is that it's science fiction. And I think that, so I just wanted to validate what you're saying about there being this barrier. But I will say it's worth it. And I was intimidated, and still am. I'm learning, but the learning has been a journey. And isn't that what science fiction and science is about? Is like enjoying, like learning and that journey. I've enjoyed.
Absolutely. Traveler is, I think, we have I think the core of what we're meant to talk about, is what is Traveler, and you mentioned Cepheus, and Cepheus is an offshoot. Cepheus is to one of the editions of Traveler the way it's comparable to Pathfinder, which many of the listeners might be more familiar with if they're tabletop players. And of course, Pathfinder is the open game license continuation of the D&D 3.5 rules. And Cepheus is the open game license continuation of the Mongoose Traveler First Edition rules. And Mongoose being one of the authorized publishers of the Traveler material. But it brings up a really important question, which is, because you listed a lot of things, is Traveler this? Is it that? Right. Is it what? And it made me think about those things. And to me, because Traveler's had a lot of licenses. There's been a D20 version of Traveler. There was a Rifts. There was a not Rifts, but GURPS version of Traveler. There was a. There have been. There are currently 2 authorized, actively published versions of it, which are Mongoose Traveler 2nd Edition and Mark Miller's own Traveler 5, published by Far Future Enterprises. And I would say that for Traveler to be Traveler, in my opinion, it must operate on a couple of these core MacGuffin things. It has to operate on the jump drive, and there can be no faster than light communication. Because one of the core conceits of Traveler is that information travels no faster than travel itself.
Right.
And messages are carried essentially by hand on spaceships from world to world.
Right. Because it operates in a close approximation to the actual rules of our actual universe, whereas Star Wars has something, our universe has relativity. Star Wars has simultaneity, where in one part of the galaxy someone can instantaneously contact someone in the other part of the galaxy immediately. And
Star Trek has the same thing with
true.
Subspace beacons, and so does Babylon 5. The vast majority of even more science-based space science fiction has instant communication. And Traveler, I think, is very importantly different in this way, and it gives the experience at the table a completely different set of assumptions and things to hold in the back of your mind. For example, in the game we just played tonight, we found out that our crew may well be considered criminals in Imperial space.
right.
Because we've been named criminals by the Imperial affiliated group that controls part of the planet that we're on. And immediately my Traveler veteran mind kicked into action saying, we got to get in front of this thing.
Right. Yeah, because they have jumped 3 ships, and that means that people are going to find out before you can get away from it. Because you got to jump 1 ship. So yeah, there's real physics, real math, and this actually creates really interesting stories. If the people listening have ever watched something that's more hard sci-fi, like my example I like is The Expanse. It's modern. It came out recently, and they deal with these things all the time. It takes time. It can take minutes or hours for a signal to reach a nearby planet in one solar system. It's not immediate. It takes time for a ship to get somewhere. There are things that can mask a ship's presence. Now, this all probably sounds really complicated and intimidating, and it did to me. I want to return to this apophenia thing to bring it into kind of a certain picture here, because you're like, well, you can generate an entire planet, and there's atmosphere, hydrographics, and tech level, and all these different things. But I'm going to build this picture together with you. I think we're already doing that, where Traveler sounds really complicated, and now I'm going to make it sound even more intimidating, and then I want us to address that, because I don't think it is. I think there's a way that someone can approach it, and that's what I wanted to talk about, because I'm new, and I had stepped away from science fiction for a long time, and this has been a really wonderful journey for me, and I've really enjoyed it. Well, anyways, when you roll something, this idea of apophenia, like you can figure out everything in a universe. So right here I have, Father Chris, I've got the random person table. Now this is, in my opinion, very elegant, because it all works. Distance equals rate times time, force equals mass times acceleration, distances, size, all of this stuff is figured in. So in space, once per week you roll an encounter. If you're on a planet in a wilderness, once per day. If you're in a settlement, once per hour. So it's very elegant and
every core edition of Traveler works that same way.
Yeah, the modern edition does these things. Yeah.
Yes, everything works on these different scales, but the same system is usable at any scale.
Yeah, it's so unbelievably elegant, and it works so well. So here we are, and we're in a settlement where once per hour they could randomly encounter something, right? And so I'm going to roll that right now. What it does is it says roll 2d6, but you're going to treat the 2 digits separately, which is what they would call a D66 table. So here we go. I got a 6 and a 1. I'm going to re-roll that, because actually, and by the way, this only occurs on a 5 and above once per hour, so it's not even certain. I got a 3 and a 5. and it says there are two dice, which is 2d6. So there are 6 researchers. Now here's the really challenging thing, and I'm going to admit it, this can be, especially if, like you were saying, like Father Chris was saying, if you don't have this underlying love of science fiction, this imagination where you're just wanting to think about these things and wanting to chew on these things, this could be challenging. But it's a challenge I want to talk about in a second. But here you are, and it says that you're in this settlement and there are 6 researchers. And all of a sudden, you have to ask, what does that mean? And on the spot, your brain has to fill in the gap. Now, in our version of the world, I'm going to try that right now. Immediately, so here's what immediately came to my mind, so you're in this adventure and you're in a wasteland right now with space Vikings and a huge gun battle, and there's beetle pigs that are running loose and all this weird stuff. If 6 researchers showed up there, that's not a settlement, this would be a wilderness encounter, but I'll go with this for now, okay? 6 researchers, those people are lost. That is what immediately came up. And you already have an interesting encounter. These 6 people become a problem. And they might provide layers to peel back. Like, what are they researching? That means that they have knowledge, probably access to resources. And you could even try to employ them to help solve problems because they're brilliant and they possess technical skills that are beyond the traveler. So immediately all this stuff's coming to my mind. And that's what you have to be prepared to present at the table. And there's a table like this for just about everything, and you can literally run this game. If you could do that, and there's no need to do this, you can do a little bit of preparation, but you could not even prepare anything and prepare an entire world and adventures and everything in a campaign that way with this game. And that's astounding.
Yes, and the more you become used to the dice system and the principles that it operates under, you need the book less and less, and this is true of any of the editions, because as we discussed just this evening about our own group, you would like some of the math taken out of your lap for a lot of these encounters and stuff, and we've been playing for a while, and it makes perfect sense. And I expressed my trust that I think you probably know how Traveler works well enough to know, everything he's saying is right. I mean, you could run Traveler with a certain basic amount of knowledge and interest in the genre with nothing but a pair of 6-sided dice.
Yeah.
It might be nice to have a pencil and paper, but you could completely go off the cuff and start rolling up all sorts of stuff, just using what you understand to be the basic principles of it. And from what I've been given to understand, that's kind of how Mark Miller runs his home games.
Yeah.
He's written reams and reams of the philosophy of life and encapsulated into a dice system, but I think that just is an expression of what already lives inside of his head, that when he's running his own games, he's just like, just get the dice and some blank paper and we'll be fine.
Okay, so that brings me to my next point, actually, which is, this podcast is primarily geared at people either new to the hobby or people that are coming from what I call the brand hobby. They're playing Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and they are ready to play a new game. So in very simple terms, like if it's somebody and they're used to playing 5e, and they're like, all right, I want to try science fiction role-playing, what would you recommend? I mean, obviously we're going to recommend Travel, right? But if that's the case, what's like step 1, 2, and 3 for that person?
Well, first of all, the edition for you, if you're just starting, is Mongoose Traveler 2nd Edition.
I actually agree. I love Classic Traveler, but I agree with that.
I love it too, but it's a whole separate series of podcasts to discuss the interesting aspects of the tabletop game design in the 70s.
Yeah.
But just for sheer readability, not that they're the best assembled books themselves, but the Mongoose system, I think, is very easy to
better
pick
than
up.
5e.
I think so. Yes, I think it's and And so therefore, then the specific answer to the question is you can get the free starter rules for Mongoose Second Edition, I think, from their website, and you'd be up and running.
And you could probably just read that book and do what it says, and you probably will be fine. Like that. That's one thing. And yeah,
absolutely. I mean, so because there's a lot of editions of Traveler out there, and well, not a lot out there, but I guess you say there's a bunch of your audience that is relatively new to tabletop games or RPGs. I assume there's also a section that's interested in OSR but hasn't played Traveler. The version, because we haven't talked about the edition that you're actually reading from right now, which I think is the 1981 facsimile edition.
It's the 1977 edition, but with 1981 errata. So, because there's literally errors in the original books,
right, and big omissions.
Yeah.
And so that's otherwise known in Traveler parlance as CT for Classic Traveler. And for people who want to get granular, it's got its own breakdown, of its own version of an OD&D versus.
Yeah, but really, they're not that different. I mean, in my opinion,
No.
Like if you compare original Dungeons and Dragons to Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, other than the fact that there's 6 stats and armor class and hit points, in my opinion, you're talking about like a different game. I don't even consider them the same game at all. But Mongoose Traveler 2nd edition to me seems pretty faithful. I've played it a few times and read it a bunch, and I think it's, if anything, it's just a more fleshed out version of the game that like kind of takes you by the hand a bit more, and it offers more tools and more things.
Yeah.
Maybe too many things sometimes.
Well, I mean, yes. Well, yeah. Well, it's a modern RPG.
Yes. Yeah.
And this is the fascinating thing about Traveler, though. Really, is that it is, at least if you're talking about the core editions, which I'm defining as any of the ones that fall into the category of they use 2d6 and they operate under these technological assumptions and stuff. Even outside of that, like I'm pretty sure anything you'd be compatible, anything from the GURPS version would be compatible too, because it uses similar tech levels and stuff. But anyway, the point is, Classic Traveler and all of the next 4 editions up to Traveler 5 that are actually published by Mark Miller or Game Design Workshop or Far Future Enterprises, Mongoose Traveler 1 and 2, all of those editions, you can pick up material from any of them, and you wouldn't even have to do any translation work. You really wouldn't. All you need would be the UPP and the UWP for the planets, and that'd be it. Everything else would work just fine. Which is why Traveler Map, the website, is able to exist.
Oh boy, we're going to talk about resources later. There's so many cool things to talk about.
But
okay, so all right, somebody.
Mongoose Second Edition.
Yeah.
Mongoose Second Edition. All the
to
way.
answer the question, how do I get started in science fiction tabletop role playing? It sounds like we're agreeing. Get the Mongoose Traveler 2nd Edition book, which they call the 2022 Core Rule Update. But get that book, and I'll include that in the description, a link for it, and read it. And read it and do what it says, essentially, because it'll. Yeah.
Now the thing, and one of the reasons that I don't love Mongoose 2nd Edition is because, again, it's a modern game. They got to sell books. So they've broken out several of what I would have called some of the core parts of the game, like designing your own ship.
Right.
They've split those off from the core book, I believe.
Right.
And you'd have to pick up a book called High Guard to be able to put your own ship together and stuff, at least.
Yeah.
Whatever. I don't want to speak out of turn here, but there's all the ships that are featured in in that core book are certainly more than enough to go on, and all of the world creation rules are there and everything. So
I would actually offer one alternative option to this that is, especially if you want to support an indie publisher, is alternative to Mongoose Traveler 2nd Edition is you would do just as well in purchasing Cepheus Deluxe, the deluxe version. Because that's going to be a very comprehensive game. It's going to tell you what a role-playing game is, what a science fiction role-playing game is. It will guide you by the hand through the entire thing. And it's going to be cheaper also, and pretty easy to get. And I'll also include that in the description below. Okay, so, but here, get the game and read the book, and it'll work out great. That's a great...
And then make yourself a bunch of characters. Make like 10 characters.
Yeah,
by yourself.
That's another thing we're going to talk about. But it's also hard to express everything about Traveler in like one go as an intro, because like it's almost like 5 or 6 different games in one game, and the character creation game is entertaining alone. You could just do the character creation game, and it's so entertaining. And then you learn, about characters and how they work and stuff. But okay, so, all right, somebody's got the book. What are some like bad ways to get started in Traveler? What are some things to avoid doing to get involved in science fiction role-playing games?
I would say one of the worst things you could do would be to go online for advice.
You nailed it, in my opinion. Like as a new guy, as like a new Traveler referee, that was the worst. I got the worst. I was so confused. It added months of waiting and being more intimidated and confusion. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's the worst.
When I said the word maddening earlier on in our conversation, and the history of Traveler, one of the maddening things about it is how the game, or the publishers of the game, seem to shy away from what the game actually is, or what the game promises, in that they keep publishing materials that are sort of railroad type plots, or plots with a few branching paths, but not really, where just the core rules themselves are so evocative if you're a science fiction lover and in any way creative, that it almost seems like they're hamstringing their own game sometimes.
Yeah.
So that's the publisher side of things that's weird and maddening, and then the player side of things.
Oh man, can I say it? Because
sure.
Yeah, let me. This is scathing. I'm going to say it though.
Yeah.
The worst part about trying to figure out how to run Traveler, as someone who, I did that. I went on the internet and I met people, and I was like, "How do you run Traveler?" Is every Traveler referee that I met in the modern Traveler sphere was at pains to convince me that it didn't have to be Traveler. It's like they were saying, "Oh, you could be this. You don't have to be in ships. It doesn't have to be in space. You don't have to know science fiction. It doesn't have to be a sandbox." And all of them were trying really, really hard to be like, it can be D&D. And I just wanted to not do D&D. I wanted to actually know Traveler, and it was a long journey to get to a point where I was like, no, we're just going to do Traveler, and we're going to let it speak for itself and actually do it. And it has been amazing since I did that. Like with starships and planets and suns and aliens and monsters, and
it's
technology.
Let Traveler.
Yeah. It's science
let
fiction.
Let Traveler be Traveler.
Yeah, it's science fiction, and do it. Do the science fiction, and it's great. I'm sorry. Was absolutely my experience.
Yeah, and for me, I run into a bunch of really helpful people. In other words, they have all sorts of resources at their disposal, websites to point you to, and there are a million wonderful, useful, well, maybe 5 or 6 to 10 wonderful, useful, in-depth websites that occupy you forever for Traveler. But the player base, is made up of, old weird nerds, old weird math-oriented, risk-averse whose play style and philosophy of Traveler are very comprehensive, but very, to put it succinctly, boring.
Well, and the opposite of that didn't help either is there's also a huge crowd within the Traveler community that they take, and we've talked about this on the podcast before, the different styles of play and philosophies of thought and stuff. And so I'll drop the name here again the second time tonight. Hickman. They have a Hickman-esque approach, and that's not bad. And certainly I enjoy a story, and I think a lot of times about your all's travelers and your all's characters. I think about, wow, what would happen if they did this? Like, I kind of muse and enjoy thinking about the narrative aspect of it. Although I hope and I think that it's an emergent narrative. It's something that's coming up out of what you all are doing. But a whole portion of the Traveler community will say things like, oh, just make it up. Don't worry about the rules. They'll say things like, just make sure it's a good story. Limit the options. Try to plan ahead. They'll do all this kind of modern storytelling stuff, and those aren't. Again, I'm not trying to say that's wrong, but what a lot of people try to do, it seems, is they're really trying hard not to make it Traveler. Whereas you could just take the book and read it and do it, and it will produce an amazing game, and it'll be highly entertaining. And it's like they've had to work really hard to try to, well, just like you said, like they're at pains to try to, like, or embarrassed of what it is or something.
And which I just don't get it, you know. And I do in a sense.
Some things don't meet modern sensibilities. Things like, oh, you could die in character creation, or be injured, or you could start with debt, or, you know, like there's a lot of things about science fiction that are based in physical reality. It's not a fantasy, and that's enjoyable. But it's challenging, and it can be challenging in creative ways and narrative ways, and it can also be challenging in intellectual ways. But science fiction, I think, requires confronting those challenges and being interested and curious and enjoying them.
Well, you know, and I really do think Traveler is best played by people who have that science fiction desire in them. I mean, it's the desire to explore.
Yeah, I agree. Exploration. That's right. Yeah.
And it's not and. What I like to tell players whenever I have a chance to run Traveler, is you should think of yourself as the DM of your own little 5-meter area around yourself, and using a combination of your stats and skills, tell me what's happening in that zone. You know, what are you doing? It's
always better when the players absolutely take ownership of things, an equal share of things, and jump in there and start sharing, and they really take ownership of the world and their character. That's really satisfying as a referee.
Yeah, and I suppose there's nothing particular about Traveler there. It's perhaps it just suffers from the fact that these types of tropes are not as well known, and you can play a silly game of D&D a lot easier than you could play a silly game of Traveler.
Yeah,
unless because the tropes are just not so well known.
Well,
and it's not operating under Star Trek rules or Star Wars rules, so the average person is not going to really have anything to grab onto to see, you know.
There's tropes, but there's also, like, we are terrestrial beings, so, like, if you describe things in terms of feet and yards and rooms and doors and a ceiling and stairs, people will understand it. But if you describe things in terms of light seconds and gravity and acceleration and mass and diameter and energy, those are beyond terrestrial things. And so
you once posted in a Discord server that we're both part of, you know, what you thought of, and I forget exactly how you labeled it, but it was like, you know, the ultimate Traveler crew, and it was like the production still from Alien.
Oh, nice.
You know, and that's you know, one of the guiding ethics behind the design of Traveler is the idea that as much as it's true that there's these grand things going on and some ancient history to the galaxy, the real truth of the matter is the universe is filled with working people going about their day-to-day lives, and your crew is among those people. Even though your working day is traveling the stars, but you're still dressed in vac suits that are rugged, and you're getting dirty in the engine room, and you're if you get into a firefight, there's desperation and the fear of death involved, and it's not all about power armor and laser swords and stuff.
Okay, so we've said be wary of like opinions and voices on the internet. I would say that's actually one of the main points of this podcast, is that it's fun to explore and listen and take part in discussions, but never be bound to voices or opinions on the internet. That's always that's a bad path to go down, in my opinion, in the hobby. But instead, you can get the Mongoose Traveler 2nd Edition core rulebook, and you can read it and listen to them, and it will guide you to where you need to go. It's a good book and a good game. Cepheus Deluxe provides that as well. I would actually say that's true of Classic Traveler, but the interesting thing is you can't skim the book. You can't take a modern approach. You have to actually read the whole thing. No, you don't have to read it to play it, but if you're just starting out and you literally read the 1981 Starter Edition, which consists of several books, it will give you everything you need. So actually, I suppose that's 3 options. Well, anyways, okay, and we've said don't listen to all the different voices on the internet that say don't actually play the game, play it differently, play it like D&D or whatever. Last thing, Father Chris, is what other advice would you give? This is somebody who's just starting out, not the core advice of like, all right, here's what you need to do right now, but what are like 2 or 3 things that, all right, you're starting out, here's some things maybe you should also do?
Well, you're going to have to edit this part. There's a bug that needs my attention.
or not.
Or leave it in.
Animal encounter.
Yeah. All right. So, additional advice for people starting off with Traveler games beyond the specifics we've mentioned.
Yeah, I mean,
I would say find your touchstone. Find your touchstone piece of fiction that's relatable as a starting point, and don't be as scared to just copy it outright. Perhaps you've seen a show like Firefly or Cowboy Bebop or what's the other one? Farscape. Might be another example of shows that are the ragtag crew on a ship that is barely making it, and everyone's got some kind of crazy backstory, and the backstories intrude on their attempt to just survive from day to day. These are the tropes of Traveler. And so, a good piece of general advice would be to continue to familiarize yourself with them and get excited about adventuring in that kind of world, and you'll find that, if you get excited about it and you let Traveler be itself, it's the path of least resistance. You're just going to find it, universe opening up for you.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think that even, I think in the Mongoose Traveler 2nd Edition book, it says that in the beginning. I think it even starts with like, hey, here's some big broad strokes. You can have aliens or Starship Troopers and have a military science fiction campaign. You could have, I'm trying to think of one, but like a Star Trek, you can have an exploration game. You can do these things, or you can have Firefly. Now, I can't wait for our discussion where we talk about how to do a merchant campaign, because boy, oh boy.
If I can offer up just one more example. I mean, we said it's not Star Wars, but the truth is one of the core relationships and one of the core scenes and captivating elements of Star Wars includes all of the Traveler tropes. And that, of course, is the meeting with Han Solo.
Yeah.
and the way that they get onto the Millennium Falcon.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
who is Han Solo but a Navy veteran who's washed up, who happens to have a ship, but
Sure.
he's in debt to a bounty hunt, to a crime
A
lord.
thug.
And Luke
Criminal.
is this farm boy. Luke as a character in Traveler would be somebody that you didn't even start their first term.
Yeah.
you just start the character at 18 with nothing.
Yeah.
You know, it's like except for whatever his planetary skills might be, which might be, pilot and
Psionics 10 or
Mongoose.
Psionics 10 or 11 though.
Sure. But in other words, the tropes are all there in things you've probably seen already. Just got to grab a hold of them and sink your teeth into them.
Yeah, I to be clear, I absolutely agree you can do Star Wars. I just think that what's really unique about Traveler is it is science fiction. It has limitations. It has a suggested distance from a gas giant that would be from a star. And that matters because you need to get to a gas giant. So when you arrive in a system, it matters because it's going to take a day. So if it's 2 million miles, then you may encounter space traffic. And then there are certain systems. So all these
Those are things that
physical realities of the world matter.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that you can't do that in Star Wars. In fact, everybody loves things like Rogue One, like where it got a little gritty. And what's that other one that came out that everybody, Andor. People that watched Andor loved it. And worlds that have gritty realities, it doesn't have to be gritty. I'm just saying it's based in reality is what I'm trying to say.
Right.
And Star Wars does that great, and it's really interesting. So yeah, you can do that. Well, actually, I'm going to share mine as a new Traveler referee of what I would recommend, which is if you're like me and you're coming from fantasy. I had left science fiction for a long time. I hadn't read science fiction books. I wasn't as much into movies and video games. I was really deep into fantasy for a long time, and it was very intimidating. And I had this conversation with Matt Finch that I really appreciated with Matt Finch, where he said, "You know what? This is a challenge." When I asked him, "How do you get involved in old school games? How do you become an old school referee?" He said, "Well, it's hard." And I thought that was kind of mind-blowing, because usually people are at pains to say something isn't hard, or, "Oh, no, anybody can do it," or "It's easy." Now, I think anyone can do this. Now, I that's not what I think anyone can do this, but I think it is worth actually really being interested in science fiction. Because there are science fantasy options out there. Like, there are other options. If you just want D&D in space, we did a review and a whole actual play series of White Star, and it's awesome. And it's super freeform, and if you're familiar with Dungeons and Dragons, it's very easy. And if you just want Star Wars, White Star is great, or Weston Games D6 is great. But if you want science fiction, Traveler is in my opinion, like it's great. And it's worth the challenge, and the challenge is fun, and just like how you were saying, coming to understand, which I'm still learning about, but coming to understand the fictional aspects of a UPP or UWP is the same thing a character in the world would do. There is a what's the word I'm looking for? A pedagogy. A pedagogy of an educational journey that you can go on as a referee or a player that is fun and challenging, just like your Traveler's going to go on. So it's worth engaging that challenge, and that's part of the fun. And like, do it. And and part of that is read the books. Now I know they say that about D&D, but honestly, you don't have to read a book and play D&D. Like, you can, but with this, like, watch the movies, watch Firefly and The Expanse, and read, and it's
Blake
worth
7.
Blake
This
7.
is my opportunity to get in. Blake 7. Blake 7, baby. Look it up. His Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy has a little bit of that stuff going on too. I mean, it's as much as it's a comedy, it's also a genuine science fiction series, written by a guy who thought about that kind of stuff. But yeah, that's. I wanted to stress in hearing what you were saying about it being a science fiction game. Further than that, I have not actually read the Cepheus rules. I know that the system is essentially Mongoose 1 extended. But does it have the same galaxy creation rules and speed of travel rules and all that kind of thing? Or is that like suggested options, or how does that work?
Off the top of my head, I can't. I don't know if I want to answer that off the top. This is a very off the top of my head thing, but it's the rules are extremely familiar, like they're Traveler, but there are differences. So
yeah.
that's
the reason I bring it up is because you can play in published modules. You can play using the Traveler map website as a source, to pick a couple of planets or a sector or a subsector. This is something I'm saying to the audience, but also to my kind host. I can't wait till you start creating your own subsector.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's going to be a way to fit that into what we're playing now with Classic Traveler, but to my mind, the things that Traveler offers and the way that you can go about them, and it offers something that not even another hard sci-fi game or pseudo hard sci-fi game offers, and that is encountering Mark Miller's theories, really, about how things work, and just the joy of watching a subsector come into being as you see the distances between the planets and you start figuring out what the political situation must look like, and all of these things just in one subsector, and then starting to connect things to it, or take it as you've made it and just completely replace an existing subsector with yours and see how it shakes there's so many. It's sort of like in a way, it's like the essence of the OSR is contained in every edition of Traveler, which I wonder if this apophenia that we're talking about, I know Matt Finch is all into apophenia.
I think we are. I mean, this is the thing. I mean,
who's not, right?
Yeah, this is the secret sauce of the whole thing to me.
Yeah. It really is, and the way Traveler presents that is in such an easily consumable fashion, especially with Mongoose 2nd Edition, that it sort of serves as its own tutorial, because that's the joy of making 10 characters or making your own subsector, is you with 2d6 and a blank notepad, and by the end of about 2 or 3 hours of gentle contemplative dice rolling and pencil scribbling, you've got something to really hang on to, something that can last you for years of gameplay, just in an afternoon of casual dice rolling. I don't know if any other game out there offers that in the same way.
Yeah, I mean, that seems to be a whole other thing, is elements of the hobby that were common in the beginning with wargamers who enjoyed simulations. They enjoyed realistic depictions of things. Like they would play games where they were competing drug cartels in Mexico, where they would play games where they were,
factions in the Wars of the Roses.
Yeah, I was just about to say covens of like political factions and 19th century and 18th century England, and they would do things like that, and that brought them a lot of joy. This kind of Alexander Macris calls the aesthetic appreciation of verisimilitude. He says it's even a thing of the nous. Like this is an appreciation of beauty and reality and what could be, and there's something in all this that's what we want, is I think, and
we love all these tools, these types of tools. All of us, when I say us, I mean like old school gamers or people who are taken with, this method of doing things. It's one of the reasons why the Tome of Adventure Design is so great and so sort of coveted as a thing, held up as this wonderful thing. and it is, but it's like it's tangential to the existence of D&D, right? It's something that's a tool to assist your playing of a game that already exists, where those tools don't explicitly exist in the game itself. In some ways they do. But with Traveller, you've got this self-contained thing where not only the world in the published materials exists if you want to, but you can generate your own world that has within it all of the same tropes. In other words, there's an Imperium, or maybe it's whatever, there's all these, there's a scout service, there's naval bases, it's, even if it's not a subsector that exists anywhere in the quote unquote official Traveller universe or OTU. That's why in Traveller they have these very frequently used, what would you call them, abbreviations, acronyms. You've got OTU, you've got YTU, your Traveller universe, you've got MTU, my Traveller universe, and these terms are slung around, because it is so common for people to create their own game with this particular game that is anyway. So there you go. That's the magic. That's the magic.
So we've gotten to talk about kind of what Traveller is. This is probably one of the more challenging episodes. It's like, to be able to answer that question is difficult. So you would say that Traveller is in some ways a science fiction role-playing game that provides within 2d6s the ability to unfold an entire galaxy, like everything from a bug and a monster or a creature to a person to a starship or a truck or a planet or a galaxy, and it does that with 2d6 and a unified streamlined set of processes that are familiar from planet to person to bug, and you can't help but appreciate that. I don't even care if you're not into science fiction, but and then if you want to get into it, and I'll include this stuff in the description, just get the rules and read them, and you can get in there. And that if you're like me and you're coming from the outside of science fiction and you're like, I'm gonna really do science fiction, it's worth it, and do it. And it is a challenge, and you can do it, and you should. So
and I feel like that's a wrap up, but something just occurred to me that we haven't even talked about. What is Traveller? It's in the name. In a way, it is all these things that we've just talked about, but we haven't talked about the name and who you are, because I guess at a later time we'll talk about the merchant campaign and all that kind of thing. But that image, the original book, the little black book, the black field with red, and the double L spelling, another specific decision by Mark Miller to go weird and European, but if the word Traveller combined with space in any way hooks into your heart and pulls at you, then you already know what Traveller is.
That's true too. Yeah, that'll tell you what you need to know. If you yearn for that and you want to go out there and explore, and that word pulls you in, it's worth engaging that challenge. It'll be worth it. Yeah, at least it has been for me so far. I've had such a great time. Well, Father Chris, thanks a lot for joining me tonight.
Thank you. Loads of fun as always.
Yeah. Mythic Mountains RPG is a private online play club that focuses on folk RPGs. Folk RPGs are the games that belong to all of us. They're what actually happens at a table between friends. It's their voice that has the authority on what is fun and what works for them. Weekly, we upload our games to allow others to sit in with us. The channel isn't monetized. We don't own the artwork, music, software, or games shown in these actual plays, and you can find links to their authors in the description. Like, subscribe, and share if you wish, or don't. Just like games in person, you're welcome to pull up a chair, sit in, and watch some of our games. No performances, no fancy equipment, just regular people playing folk pencil and paper role-playing games and having a good time. We hope these games will prove a source of enjoyment to anyone just wanting to listen in, anyone looking for examples of how actual groups run and play folk RPGs, and most importantly, if you haven't found your group yet, you're welcome here at ours.